Welcome, class, to the lecture Understanding the edTPA Assignment, Part 3. This week, this lecture will take the place of a content-based lecture, and it will talk to you and teach you how to step through Part 3 of the assignment, which is data analysis. Before you get started with Part 3, it will be necessary to make up another learning target because your data analysis of the hypothetical data that you're going to analyze will have two learning targets. So first, you should think of another learning target and write it in your first learning target on the top portion of Part 3. So LT1 is the existing learning target. LT2 is the second learning target. Also, remember that LT2, your new learning target, should have a target for success, like with 80% accuracy, for example, and it should be aligned with your standard, just like your first learning target. So now the hypothetical example and also the real example that you're going to use for your actual edTPA assignment contains the scores for 7 students. Each of the scores has a 0 or a 1 in the column. A 0 means the student missed the question, a 1 means the student got it right. If you look at the top row, you can see the types of questions there are. For example, multiple choice 1, multiple choice 2, multiple choice 3, etc. It does not matter if your actual quiz does not line up with the order of these questions. If you look beneath the type of item it is, you will see LT1 or LT2. This means that the item lines up with a certain learning target. So for example, multiple choice 1 in the gray column lines up with learning target 1. Multiple choice 2 lines up with learning target 2. Now for this example, I'm going to give you 2 learning targets. Learning target 1 is student will be able to divide 2-digit numbers by 2-digit numbers with 80% or greater accuracy. Learning target 2 is student will be able to divide 3-digit numbers by 3-digit numbers with 80% or greater accuracy. So learning target 1 is about 2-digit division. Learning target 2 is about 3-digit division. You will have other learning targets, but it's okay for this example to use these 2. So when you start to look at scores, the first thing you're going to do is just kind of eyeball them, look them over and see, which ones did students do well on, which ones did they struggle, and this might give you a clue as to what was going on with the scores. So let's say hypothetically that you had 2 learning targets, and this is again in the example. Let's say that you had a learning target, student will be able to divide 2-digit numbers by 2-digit numbers with 80% or greater accuracy. And a second learning target where they did the same thing with 3 digits. So learning target 1 is about 2-digit division, and learning target 2 is about 3-digit division. So if you look at this, you can tell that many students seem to do well, if you look at it, on certain items. For example, look at multiple choice 3. Everyone in the display here did well on multiple choice item number 3. So we know, for example, that students did well on item 3. Look at B. What did some or many students appear to struggle? So if you look at it, you see that students appear to struggle with multiple choice questions 2 and 4. So you see, look at multiple choice 2, and I've put below the item number the learning target. So multiple choice 1 is learning target 1, Multiple choice 2 is learning target 2. Multiple choice 3 is learning target 1. But look at that multiple choice 2. Do you see in the display here, only Kathy got it right. So 2, multiple choice, question number 2 was one that they struggled with. Similarly, question number 4 was one that they struggled with. Go down to the true false. You can see that they also struggle with true false, question 1, and true false, question 3, but they didn't struggle with true false, question 2, because they were all ones in that column. So this is a way to just start looking at which questions many people got right and which questions many people got wrong. You can model your answer on the response answers that I'm giving in this video. 3.2, the next thing you have to do is to start to look at totals and averages for your quiz. So remember, a total is when you add things, and an average is when you add scores and divide by how many things you added. So we're going to calculate one total and two averages. So we're going to calculate a total score for each student, the quiz score total. We're going to find the mean average for each question. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to add the column numbers and divide by the number of students, which in this case is 7. And then finally, in the last cell of the table, the last row on the bottom right, we're going to find the mean average for the entire class. In other words, what was the average score in the entire class by adding the numbers in the final column and dividing by the number of students, 7. That's the overall class average. So let's see what we do and how we do this. Here's how you calculate the quiz score total. Notice the score totals in red. How did we derive those? Well, we simply added the numbers in the row. So Kathy had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 right. So her score was 8. Jane had 6 right. Billy had 7 right. So this is an easy way to calculate the scores. This would be their grade on the quiz. Note that because there are 10 questions on this quiz, you can think of 8 out of 10 as 80%, and 6 out of 10 as 60%, etc. If you had 12 questions on the quiz, you'd have to do some math to derive the percentages. But because this is a nice round number, 10, this is the way you can think of it. The next thing you would calculate is the item average. So look at, for example, multiple choice 1. This is aligned with learning target 1. If we add all the students up who got it right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and divide that by the number of students, 6 divided by 7, we get 0.86. So this is an item average for multiple choice 1. So again, because this is based on 0 and 1, you can think of this as like 86%. So the overall class average, in a way, on item 1 was 86%. Similarly, the overall class average on multiple choice 2, which is aligned with learning target 2, is 29%. So already you're beginning to see that they did much worse on the second question than on the first question. On multiple choice 3, everyone got it right. On multiple choice 4, 71%, so a little bit less there. And here's where you can start to really look and see how students did across the learning targets, which we'll talk about in a minute. For the overall class average, that's that red number 7 in the bottom right corner. All we did is we added the students' scores together to get a total and divided that by 7 students. And you can see that the number was 7. So the average, overall class average score was 7 out of 10, or 70%. So now that we have some basic numbers, we need to start looking at patterns of learning. And the first thing we want to do is look at what's the range of data for all students' scores. A range means you take the highest value and you find two values, the highest value and the lowest value, and you subtract the lowest from the highest. So let's look and see what the highest score was. The highest score was 9, and that was actually scored by two students, Kevin and Carly. Two of the students scored lowest, and that's Juan and Lisa, and that's 5. So our maximum score is 9, our minimum score is 5, and so the range, the spread was large, 4 points between the scores. So what does that tell us? Well, if you had all the student scores clustered around similar scores, so if you had most students scored 7 or 8, or all students scored 7 or 8, we'd say there's not much variability in scores. And so if you have some students, though, that are high and some students that are low, there is variability. And what that means is some students are struggling while other students are really getting the material. And so you might need to differentiate in your approach a little bit. You're going to have to reteach some concepts, for example, to Juan and Lisa, while you're probably going to need to challenge Kevin and Carly with some more advanced concepts. Other students, Kathy, Jane, and Billy, are in the middle. The next thing we want to do is to determine the range of data for individual item scores. So just like we did previously, we have to think about, instead of high scores and low scores for students, now we're identifying the high scores for each individual item on the quiz and the low scores. So if we look across the bottom row, we see that there were a couple of items that students scored very well on. They scored a 1. That was multiple choice 3 and true or false 2. You'll notice maybe that these two items are both associated with learning target 1, which is 2-digit division. So students did at least all students did were able to get at least 2 of the items all correct on 2-digit division. If you look at the low score, it's multiple choice 2 associated with learning target 2, and that was a 0.29. So if we simply subtract 1 minus 0.29, we get 0.71. And so this is the range of the item scores. Now, 0.71 out of 1, that's pretty large. So again, there's a lot of variability among questions. So if you look at the answers, the items on which students scored highest one were multiple choice 3, true, false 2. Both items were associated with learning target 1, 2-digit by 2-digit division. The item on which students scored lowest was multiple choice 2, 0.29, 3-digit by 3-digit division. This is another piece of evidence that students struggle more with learning target 2. Also, the spread between 0.29 and 1 is quite large, indicating there was a wide variability of performance between these items. The next thing you're going to do is to produce a type of chart or graph for your data. I'm not going to tell you specifically what type of chart, but I am going to ask you to do a visual representation of the data. It could be a bar chart, it could be a number of things, and we're going through several options here. If you're unfamiliar with how to do bar charts, I've created a folder in this week's learning module for how to do that. It's best done through Excel. You can do it in Word, but it's best done through Excel. One type of simple bar chart that might be helpful to see is a visual arrangement of each student's score. So to do that, all you would do is type in the name and the final score, And then there's an option in Excel that allows you to highlight that data and with 1 or 2 clicks produce a bar chart. You're to copy and paste your bar chart into the template so that I can see the bar chart. You're not due to do it separately. And to copy and paste in Excel, all you do is click on it, click on copy, and then go to your document and click on paste. There are lots of YouTube videos and other helpful. I've put some links in the folder, but with just a little bit of searching, I'm sure you can find out how to do it. And this is a valuable skill for when you begin to teach. So you'll want to be familiar not only with Word, but with Excel, or you can also do it through Google Spreadsheets. Another type of bar chart that might be helpful is a visual arrangement of each item's score. So here, instead of putting in the students' names and the scores, you're putting in the average score, item score. So that row that runs across the bottom, that row of numbers. So you can see here that it's sort of a chaotic arrangement of scores, except that I have put in learning target 1 first. So all the items for learning target 1 and all the items for learning target 2. And if you just look at it, if you kind of draw a line down the middle, you can see that learning target 1 has taller bars and therefore higher scores than learning target 2. So if you're going to choose this, what you might want to do is not put the orders in, the items in order of numbers, like the way they appear in the table, but to group all the items that go with a particular learning target together. Here's a similar chart where I've arranged it by question average. This time though, I've put learning target 1 in blue, learning target 2 in red, which helps me to visually distinguish between the two. But probably the most powerful bar chart would be to break the students' scores and obtain an average by learning target, as shown below. So, for example, what I did here is I just simply, let's take Kathy. I added all of Kathy's scores, or let's take Kevin's because you can see the scores at the top. I added all of Kevin's scores together and separated them into learning targets. And so his average for learning target 1 was 0.83. So there should be 5 questions for learning target 1. Add those scores up, divide by 5, and you can get a 0.83. So Kevin got 83% on his learning target 1. Kevin got an 80% on learning target 2. Not bad. So we would consider Kevin proficient because remember our target says 80%. So if a student hits 80% or greater, we would consider that he or she has mastered the standard. Similarly, Carly got very similar scores. But you can look at, for example, Jane and see that Jane struggled with learning target 2. She got an 83% on learning target 1 and a 20% on learning target 2. And so that's below where she should be, below the 80%. So I've highlighted in red the student scores that fell below 80%. So you can see very clearly what students need to work on. Kathy, for some odd reason, has mastered 3-digit division, which is learning target 2, but she hasn't mastered learning target 1. I would want to speak with Kathy and find out what's going on because it's very odd to have mastered the more advanced learning target. Maybe she simply made some addition, arithmetical operation mistakes. So I'd want to check and see if she really knows how to do 2-digit. But some of them follow a very predictable pattern. Jane has not mastered learning target 2, 3-digit. Billy has not mastered it. And Juan and Lisa have not mastered either learning target. So this really is a powerful bar chart that tells you very quickly what students need to work on. The next thing we're going to do is dig a little deeper and see which questions were challenging and which questions did students do well on. So on challenging, we can tell the students struggle the most on learning target 2, which is 3-digit division, because obviously the averages were lower overall. Students particularly struggled on the following items: multiple choice 2 and the matching item. Overall, only one item, true false 2, met the target for mastery. This tells us that overall, many students need more work with learning target 2, and perhaps fewer students are struggling with learning target 1. Now let's turn to what students did well. And what did this tell you about students learning? Overall, students did well on learning target 1. However, they did experience difficulty with multiple choice 6. So if you look at that, that's the fourth bar over from the left. You can see that's a little bit of a dip there. Perhaps this question was not aligned with content or worded in a difficult manner. So because that's a little bit lower, I might want to look at that question and see if it's really the content students are struggling with, or is it something about the question? The class as a whole appears to have mastered learning target 1, although 1 or 2 students may require more work. The next thing we want to do is to determine the focus of the next lesson and provide evidence for why we want to focus on this. So the question reads, based on this student group learning data, what might be the focus of your next lesson? Why? So this is asking, should you just move on? Should you do some reteaching? If you're going to reteach, who are you going to reteach? How are you going to reteach? Remember, when you reteach, you can't just do the same thing. That's like talking to someone who doesn't understand your language and just saying it louder. You have to think of a different way to present the material. Here's the answer. Based on the overall classroom averages for the 2 learning targets, I can say that most students, Jane, Billy, Kevin, and Carly, have mastered learning target 1, 2-digit division. However, fewer students, Kathy, Kevin, and Carly, have mastered 3-digit division. 4 students need help with 3-digit division, Jane, Billy, Juan, and Lisa. So I would reteach this skill in a different way. So notice everything up until here has been providing evidence for your statements. You cannot begin this problem by just saying, I would reteach learning target 2. You've got to cite the evidence. What does the data say? And so you, by now, because we've been led through this very careful exercise, you should be very familiar with the data in terms of how did students score on each of the learning targets, how did they score on each item, who needs help, and why. So now we get to what you would do. I would work in a small group with these 4 students, Jane, Billy, Juan, and Lisa, modeling the problem first. Now we're talking about 3-digit, and then asking them to think aloud to tell me how they're solving it as they go. We would first do the problems together, and then I would ask them to think silently how to solve the problem as they went. After each problem, I would check their work. So this is called modeling, where you're doing a think aloud. What do I do next? How do I do this? And gradually you transition those students from a think aloud to thinking to themselves silently in their heads until they're able to do it independently. You set up a lot of scaffolding or support, and then you start to remove it. While this lesson was going on, I would provide enrichment math activities to the rest of the class. Since Jane appears to have mastered 3-digit division, but not 2-digit division, which is odd, I would conference with her to make sure she understood the skill and it wasn't a fluke of the testing. So who are you going to reteach? What will the rest of the students be doing? Evidence-based. The next step is we've done some general class analysis. Now we need to turn our attention to individual student learning analysis on data. And so we're going to call out a couple of students. In this example, it's Billy. In your real edTPA, it'll be another student. Review the questions that Billy answered correctly and those that Billy did not. Think about how your quiz and how the data align with your quiz. Analyze these results and answer the questions below in your data. With what questions was Billy able to do well? And so if we look at Billy's data, which is highlighted, we can see if we examine the data table, Billy did well with multiple choice 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, true, false 2, and 3. These questions were aligned primarily with Learning Target 1, although a couple were from Learning Target 2. So Billy seems to have mastered most of Learning Target 1. With which questions did Billy struggle? Billy struggled with multiple choice 2, true, false 1, and the matching item. These questions were all aligned with Learning Target 2. So Billy did not do well on 3-digit division, Learning Target 2. So now we know Billy's struggling with Learning Target 2. The question asks, what feedback would you give to Billy? Place exact feedback in quotation marks. Be specific and focus on both Billy's strengths and challenges. The feedback should offer Billy clear and specific information on his performance related to the lesson target and be related to supporting an increased mastery of the current learning target. So if you recall back when we talked about how to give feedback and praise, this is that component. A hamburger method is a great method to use. You start with praise. You put in one specific piece of feedback that helps Billy to improve. You can't just say to Billy, what do you think you got wrong? Or what do you think you should do next? You have to tell him. And finally, ending with praise. Here's an example of a piece of feedback you might give Billy. Billy, I can tell you really understand how to divide 2-digit numbers by 2-digit numbers. I noticed you made similar errors in the 3-digit number problems and chose items that were close but not totally correct. Can you show me how you're doing these problems? Let's do one together. Then Billy might demonstrate the problem. Okay, I can see what the problem is, Billy. You're not placing the decimal point on top of the division house in the correct place. Watch as I do it. Pay close attention and I'm sure you'll progress. So the praise there is, I can tell you really understand how to divide 2-digit numbers. The feedback was, let's see what you're doing and then give him a suggestion. Align the decimal point at the proper place. And then the last piece of praise was, I'm sure you'll progress. That's an encouraging piece of praise. This encourages mastery learning. It's very specific. It's related to a standard. A second student, Carly, did quite well, so we're going to give feedback to Carly. Carly, I'm really pleased with how well you've mastered both 2-digit and 3-digit division. You only missed one problem on the quiz. Can you explain to me what happened here? Okay, I thought that might be because you rushed through a bit. Try slowing down and checking your work, and next time you may do even better. In the meantime, let's try a challenge, 4-digit by 4-digit. So this acts like the hamburger praise again. I'm pleased you've mastered both learning targets. Here's a way to improve. Try slowing down and providing a way to get better as well as an additional challenge. Don't forget that advanced students also need to be challenged in their work. So that concludes the data analysis portion. The next part of the final part of edTPA 3 is the reflection. Think about what this process has taught you about assessment that you will take forward into the edTPA in your classroom. What part of the process went well? What was difficult? Did anything surprise you? What would you change to improve your submission if you could. As always, please feel free to email me with any questions.